Welcome to What is Going for new thought from the edge of Each week on OMTimes' flagship radio show, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandie Sedgbeer conducts thought-provoking interviews with inspirational authors, artists, musicians, scientists, speakers, and filmmakers who are working at the point where spirituality and science meet consciousness at the very edge of Here is your host, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello. Well, here we are, just 9 months into a new decade in a century that many look forward to as ushering in a new golden era in the history of humanity. So, how's it working for you so far? For more than 30 years, today's guest has been predicting that this decade would start with a bang. And so it has, in just the way he foresaw it. John Hogue is an internationally acclaimed futurist and a scholar of spirituality, parapsychology, mysticism, and prophecy. He's considered world authority on Nostradamus, and he's the best-selling author of dozens of books on prophecy, which have been translated into over 20 languages. John Hogue joins me tonight to share some of the prophecies and predictions revealed in his forthcoming book, The Roaring Twenties, Decade of Destruction and Transformation, and also give us a glimpse into what the 2020s will set up for the 2030s. John Hogue, welcome.
Thank you, Sandie.
John, you started your website, HogueProphecy.com, in November 1999 to offer reports and books on current events and the field of prophecy, Nostradamus, global warming, the science of meditation, and the development of new religions. And now your site is one of the top 3 websites about prophecy and Nostradamus on the internet. What I want to know first is, how did a child who grew up in Hollywood with film industry parents, who became a musical comedy actor and an opera singer, become an internationally acclaimed futurist and a best-selling author who's regarded as a world authority on Nostradamus and prophecy, and, it has to be said, Nostradamus' doppelganger?
Well, I guess since Nostradamus was a Renaissance man, I guess it requires a Renaissance 20th century man and now 21st century man to do that, achieve that extra little feather in my cap. So
what actually, stimulated that move from successful, what was going to be a very successful career as a singer, to something else?
Well, I did love singing opera, and I probably would have been well known at it, but I didn't like the politics. The business does get its prima donna term, for it earns it, and I just could not play the political game, and so I was pulled back to something that I felt deeply about since I was 8, and that was to become a writer. And I started going deep into that, and now 51 books later, 1,200 articles later, here we are. So the main thing that I think triggered it was a fascination that was triggered by the Cuban Missile Crisis when I was about to be 8 years old. The first of 3 very powerful premonitions in my life took place at that time. Before it was known there was a crisis, I was already seeing it, and my little, almost 8-year-old being had a hard time dealing with that. If it had not been resolved, my birthday would have been the opening of World War III. So it shocked me probably a little earlier than most kids get shocked into a world awareness and an interest in history, the news, and the strange ways in which human beings repeat their past in the future all the time. And that just developed more and more and more as I gained a rather comprehensive and detailed grasp of history. And that ultimately led to trying to find out how the formula basically that I deal with is this. If I came to understand that if human beings keep programming each new generation to repeat the past and call it the future, it will have a critical mass. And the critical mass that I saw of crisis was the 2020s. And so if we do not break with that identification with the past, I'm not saying break with the past, but the identification with it, and start bringing our consciousness more into the present moment, in the next 20 years or sooner, there's no future for the human race.
Well, did you foresee 30 plus years ago that you would be so successful? I mean, come on, 50 plus books, that is really prolific. And, the number of articles, it seems like you churn them out, they just keep pouring out of you. Could you have foreseen at that time that, what you stand for would make you so well known?
The fundamental means to which what I do is to be an innocent, open medium. There's something of the innocent child in me that has never been completely buried by society's ego-magnified attempts. And so I don't even think of that. In fact, I don't do anything. This stuff just pours through, and the more, of course, it's important to add a very significant element to my work that began in 1980. Began with me sitting at the feet of Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, better known as Osho today, and receiving sannyas from him in 1980 in India. The augmentation of a meditative path, using meditations that, I would add, are tailored for the needs of modern human beings, has been, without that, there would have been no John Hogue doing these prophecies and being so prolific, because the thing I've understood now is that the more you are not, the more you are simply a witness of the mind and the body, the potentials for the creativity that the entire existence is absolutely showering can also take you up. And the deeper that I go into not doing anything from my core, the more all of this flood of creativity effortlessly comes out.
So when you are making these prophecies and predictions, I know that you're an expert on Nostradamus. Are you looking at Nostradamus's work on his predictions and then applying astrology and your own, psychic ability to it?
I've always felt that since prophecy is a subjective experience, like love, like meditation, it requires, if one is going to be an interpreter of prophets, one has to also become a prophet. It's just like a person who says, well, I'm going to be an expert on love, and the way I can be an expert is I'll never fall in love, so I can be objective about it. It's simply impossible. So meditation, I started testing it. Every prediction I make is documented. Either it's on radio or on TV, or it's copiously written down in my books. And so with that, I started to objectify how accurate or inaccurate I was. And it's then that I started to see how one of the difficult challenges of prophecy is to have it filtered through your mindset, your hopes, your fears, your culture. Yeah. And because of that, I also applied that to the study of Nostradamus, which I've been studying for 40 years. And the other thing I learned with that is you cannot know if translations of Nostradamus are good or not unless you become a good translator. So I also had to learn how to read his very strange Nostradamian 16th century French.
Well, you have declared, your new book coming out in the spring next year, which is quite a tome, and you've spent a long time working on it, but you have declared the 2020s, the roaring 2020s, the decade of destruction and transformation. Now, that's a statement, isn't it? It's not a question.
Yeah, it's definitely a declaration. And by using "and" too, it doesn't mean an either or, it's both. In fact, it's the collision of an old humanity with a new. an old humanity that often in collective prophecies and traditions. I mean, one of the more famous ones would be the Hopi prophecies and the great purification by fire that destroys the fourth world to create a new fifth world. It's also intriguing that the Hopis, as many other ancient people, saw the last destruction as a great flood, and they all share the fire theme as well for our times. Now, fire can be a lot of different things. It can be literal fire. It can be the fires of megafires across the world, global warming. It can also be the nuclear fires of a nuclear war, or it can be the inner fire that purifies one from identification, that is meditation. And I think it's a little bit of all three.
I was going to say, it's all of them, isn't it? Yeah, we've got it.
See, I'm psychic. I knew that. I knew you were going to say that.
Well, I mean, and we really, I mean, so when we entered 2012, I mean, many people have been looking at this time. They talk about the echoes of 2012. This was the time something big was going to happen. We've had all of the astrological portents telling us this, and nobody, I don't think anybody, maybe you, but nobody else even thought about a pandemic. So you must have been sitting there waiting for this to happen.
Well, I have thought that there would be great pandemics in the 2020s, and this is not the first one. Nostradamus talked about several great pandemics at once. And so this is perhaps the beginning of several. Now, I'm currently writing a book, Nostradamus, Coronavirus, and the Pandemic Prophecies, that should be out in a month. It was supposed to be a little 20,000-word book. Now it's over 100,000 words because plague from the plague doctor from the 16th century, I discovered, is quite a key, opening up all kinds of things that are dealing with this issue of the old humanity. Getting back to the Hopi situation, the old humanity who, the Hopis say, will drop dead from its own fear, from fear of change. So, but if there are people who embrace the unknown as it is, not projecting their past identifications of traumas and fears and hopes on it, then the new world that's coming after the Great Purification is for them. And unfortunately, the 2020s are roaring in many ways. They roar with the silence of empty streets of cities all over the world from this pandemic during March, April, May. They roar with Black Lives Matter and other revolutionary issues that are going to come up. They roar with the storms of climate change becoming climate catastrophe. And ultimately, what I've had to find in this prophetic work is that there's a blessing inside everything. I would contend to all of us that it's only when the human race is faced with the abyss that the human race has a chance to choose to survive. Now, my teacher used to see this coming, Osho used to see this coming for decades. It's Noah's Ark of Consciousness unraveling prophecy he made in 1983. This is, it's only, he always felt, he said, I cannot believe that the human race, when faced with its collective extinction, will choose to destroy itself. And I also contend the same thing. In fact, I would say that it's only when you're at the edge of the cliff are you aware of the abyss that you don't want to fall down into, and then you pull away. And that means you change. And so that's what's going to be coming in the next 20 years. I mean, this decade is a decade of death and transformation. The next decade, the 2030s, will be the decade of extinction or rebirth.
Well, you're absolutely right. We've only got to go back to World War II. And certainly, I don't know about America, but in England, there was this tremendous pulling together of people.
It happened in America, too. In fact, it was, in some respects, there was a part of it that was even more dramatic in that if when you consider that the isolationist movement in America was very, very strong. I mean, it was impossible to think that it would end, but all it took was one bomb hitting the Arizona and blowing it up in Pearl Harbor. And the next day, they were calling FDR and saying, "What can we do?" So it is possible, and it's only out of shocks. That's the positive side of shocks. We've had a shock this year, several, and I'm glad it came so soon, because now we're going to get used to it. Back to World War II. World War I was actually a more psychic terror and shock to people because they lost their innocence into a modern world war. By World War II, even though it was worse, people were more used to the shock and could respond better.
Absolutely. Yeah. I wonder on a whole other level how much of what is happening now is, we are contributing to, and I'm not talking about just the fact that, we're just destroying everything, but we are contributing to, in another way, the fear that we have, the fear that we've created in society, creates more fear, and we produce viruses that, when you look at the homeopathic remedy for this virus, it's one for fear. So, I do wonder whether there's this kind of interaction going on a whole other level that is bringing this all to the fore.
Well, I fear we'll have to wait for the answer after the ad. But don't fear. We're going to answer that.
Don't fear. Okay. All right. You're listening to What is Going On. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and my guest today is futurist, scholar of spirituality, world-renowned authority on Nostradamus, and best-selling author of dozens of books on prophecy, John Hogue. And we're talking about the prophecies and predictions shared in his forthcoming book, The Roaring Twenties, Decade of Destruction and Transformation. Still to come, financial recession, mega fires, superstorms, pandemics, effects of global warming, disclosure. Stay tuned. John Hogue will address more of these topics when we return.
The future of Internet radio is here. OMTimes Radio, IOM FM.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
More than 24 million Americans have an autoimmune disorder, and that number continues to grow. I'm Sharon Saylor, and I'm one of those 24 million. To put that number in perspective, cancer affects about 9 million and heart disease up to 22 million. That's why I've brought together top experts and those thriving regardless of their diagnosis to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information. Join me, Sharon Saylor, Friday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, for the Autoimmune Hour on Life Interrupted Radio to find out how to live your life uninterrupted.
Hello, I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes' flagship radio show, What is Going On. As a long-time editor, book judge, spiritual magazine publisher and radio host, I've read thousands of books and interviewed hundreds of authors and teachers. So I know what's worth reading and what isn't. Now, with the spiritual book market growing increasingly crowded, more and more people are seeking my help in finding the authentic voices, the empowering tools, and the genuine skip the BS guidance that will make the most difference to their spiritual development. So I decided to make it easier by bringing my knowledge, experience, and considerable network of contacts together in the No BS Spiritual Book Club. There are no ads, no joining fees, no obligations, and no BS. Just an ever-growing library compiled by recognizable and respected names of the 10 best books that helped them the most on their journeys. Plus, free book excerpts, audios, and live video interviews where you can quiz them about their spiritual journeys and their 10 best list choices. Your time and money are valuable, your spiritual journey even more so. If you're looking for genuine guidance from people who've walked this path before you, check out Sedgbeer.com. Click on the No BS Spiritual Book Club tab and join the club. That's sedgbeer.com, sedgbeer.com. I'll see you there.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Welcome back. John Hogue, your Hogue Prophecy Bulletin is a fabulous newsletter that I think everybody should subscribe to. It has so much information in it. I would like to just focus a little bit in this segment on some of the topics that you covered in the latest version. And we're looking at, the pandemic, we're looking at the US election, we're looking at what's going on with Iran and various other things. So let's just start a little bit with the Sarsko V2 virus. Is there anything in what you're reading, seeing, investigating, that would give you any clue whether it's man-made, manipulated, or totally natural?
Well, it certainly is a very odd disease, doing things that are quite unique, like being very specific to diabetes and other problems. In the evolution of writing this book, on it, and Nostradamus clearly saw it. He called it the plague of the great husk or shell, a pod. It's like a seed pod with pricks on it, and that is exactly what it looks like. And it's intriguing because often when he saw things like a movie. He heard it, he saw it, and he smelled the future. And sometimes it stinks. But anyway, the situation with this is that we've seen this iconic now picture of the red spiked, protein spiked armed white pod that's been showing up in every magazine on every show. And so it's intriguing because it's never happened before. And it's so he saw it. He talked about it coming into Italy because he was very Eurocentric in his view of the world, especially with the French. He describes the villages and cities in Lombardia where it was the major outbreak. It's not often that I look in Nostradamus, like so many fans of Nostradamus, and seek anything that's going on significantly in their times as well. You see, Nostradamus saw it. I come from a much more careful side of actually being aware of how easy it is to be caught up in the cloudy verses of Nostradamus and find exactly what you want. If you don't like Nostradamus, you will find exactly what you want. You'll be a blind debunker. If you believe in Nostradamus blindly, then you're going to find everything in your head is going to be in Nostradamus's prophecies, and he'll do no wrong. Either case is not really looking at the man and his work with a centering that's neither for this or that. So when I say I see something like this, it's very rare, but it's definitely there. And so I honestly don't know yet. I am still trying to figure out what happened. In the book, I look at all the odd leads that are going on. I mean, it is even possible that it was, since Americans were also working in the same lab in Wuhan. By the way, it's named the city of the sloping park. There is a sloping park on the river, Yangtze River, very famous park that my friends in China pointed out to me. Is called, it's not official, it's the Yangtze Park, but they call it the sloping park because it's a river bank and it slopes down and it snakes along the Yangtze in Wuhan. Park Slope is a district of New York City in Brooklyn. So it's using a synecdoche, which is a wordplay, Greek-Latin wordplay that people love to use in the 16th century, where you use a a smaller thing to name the bigger thing. If you're saying Paris, you mean France.
Yeah.
If you're saying sloping park, or park slope, you mean New York or Wuhan. So, I can't really answer that yet. I don't know, except that there are certainly a lot of prophecies of Nostradamus that deal with man-made plagues. But the important thing is that his perception of what a plague is could be something we would overlook, like radiation from nuclear bombs, like pollution, even up the foggy verses. And so you've got to know all of that, biblical classic as well as Latin classic and Greek. And so that gets you some rather surprising openings.
Well, given what you've just said, then I think the definition of a pandemic, could encompass many things, and therefore we can expect it to be a new normal moving forward.
There's no turning back. That's the most important thing. I was telling people before this year started to look out for a thing happening around April, and then a little again in September, and in a major way after the U.S. elections starting in mid-November into December. That these 3 windows would be moments that you'll wake up and you're not going to be able to even go back to what we've been in since this year started.
Yeah.
This in the good side of this is training for us to get ready for evolutionary crisis and transformation, which means we have to leave behind things that no longer work for us. We have to drop our teddy bears and grow up.
For sure. Let's have a look at the US election, because it's such a big topic. Now, you've said brace for world-changing portents of the Roaring Twenties in a September and November surprise. You've accurately predicted the winner by popular vote of 13 out of 13 US presidential elections since 1968. So, what do you think? Who might win, and does it really matter?
Well, one thing that's clear about this election, it could be the last election as we've known elections, as we've known governance in the United States, because we are heading now into a period that actually a lot of American seers saw, and I've been predicting the potential by 2020 of a civil war or revolution situation in America again. As far back as 1998. In fact, I was doing the BBC on a landline making that prediction, saying that if the Republicans and Democrats continue down this path of partisan behavior, then in a couple decades, I imagine we might be threatened with a civil war in this country by the year 2020. And here we are. So the thing is, I can tell you for sure, we in America elect our presidents, and from 1840 and up to every 20 years, up to Ronald Reagan in 1980, every president that has been elected in one of his terms, Roosevelt having 4, they all died in office, mostly from violent actions. And Reagan was the only one to survive it because it was in an air sign during that time, but he just missed bleeding out. And because of his own healthiness, they didn't expect that he was so seriously wounded. But he survived. So that changed the curse. The Curse of Tecumseh, by the way, is Tecumseh was a leader of I think it was the Iroquois Union, and they fought the Battle of Tippecanoe, and General Harrison, who later became president, when he killed Tecumseh in the battle, when the brother of Tecumseh, who was the medicine man of the group, heard it, he made a prophecy saying, "You will see a white chief die every generation in your white tribe." And Harrison was the first. It was Inauguration Day, 1841. After winning in 1840, he wanted everybody to see him, so he took off his beaver hat so everybody could see his white shock of hair in a driving rainstorm. He caught pneumonia and died. After that, Abraham Lincoln, 1860, the American Civil War, and in his second term, he was assassinated. 20 years later, You have Garrison. He was assassinated. 20 years later, McKinley, assassinated. 20 years later, in 1920, Harding died of a heart attack. 20 years later, Roosevelt wins 1940, but he dies in his term after that, new term in 1944 with brain aneurysm. 20 years later, JFK assassinated. 20 years later, 1980, Reagan assassinated attempt. Now, 20 years later after that, you have Al Gore versus George W. Bush, and now it's changed. It's a political assassination. Al Gore did win the majority of the vote. He also won Florida. There was a recount by scholars. He won it by 20,000 uncounted votes. And so that's political assassination committed by the 8 judges of the Supreme Court. Then moved down 20 years later, and here we have 2020, where it seems the curse is now spreading not just to the leader, but to democracy itself.
Yeah.
So the thing that I'm actually forced to write another unexpected literary child. I'm working on it right now. Hopefully it will not be as big as the last one, which was the coronavirus book, which is still being built. But this shorter book is going to look at who will win the popular vote and who will win the unpopular vote, because we have this weird situation in our democracy called the Electoral College. It exists, the long story short, it exists also because American provinces or states have a lot more sovereignty than they do in Europe. And so, I mean, these are independent states in a union. It's a little bit like a quasi-EU with all the problems here in America.
Yeah.
And so, I understand both sides of this issue, but the thing is that it's very likely that Biden will win the popular vote and Trump will win the unpopular vote again. That is the Electoral College. And it will probably be a much tighter difference, because I don't only predict the popular vote, I also predict the percentage. Last time with Clinton, I said she'd win, but I also said 13 months before the thing, in November 8, 2016, I also said that there was no other Republican but Donald Trump, at a time when he was considered a complete clown for getting into this. I looked at his astrology and said, my God, this man is the only one against Clinton who could upset her. His stars are really good. If he survives to November 8th, he could upset her, but she would win the popular vote. So that's what happened. And it could happen again. It's not official yet because I'm still looking finally at the chart, because I could not actually look at this future until there was actually another ticket. And now that Kamala Harris, as I had predicted, she would be the most likely one to be picked. Now I feel I can actually start looking at the astrology of the election day and the inauguration day for all three people, and that's what I'm drawing up for this book.
You did hint in your prophecy bulletin that if Biden got in, he wouldn't complete it, and that
neither president will complete their term.
Okay, so
yeah.
What's going to happen to Trump?
Well, here's the thing. I'll start with Trump, and then I'll end with Biden-Harris. Trump is bookended by a Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and a Vice President, Pence, who belong to a Christian nationalist dominionist organization, which is a kind of an extreme end-time view that is the same kind of stuff that's kind of rocking the Muslim world for the last 20 years, that ultimately has led to Salafist groups, also Al-Qaeda and ISIS. People in the West do not understand the prophetic significance of those bodies and the terrorist organizations in the Middle East. They are very much eschatological end-time, Islamic end-time driven groups. And unfortunately, the Christian world is going to, in the 2020s, be faced, as the world starts unraveling, a lot of people are going to believe that is a sign of the end times, and they'll try to hasten it. And I'm very concerned about Mike Pence. Trump, either through a health issue or just given a golden parachute, is replaced by Mike Pence, and then he tries to turn America into, well, I call it like this as a kind of a parody, ISIS, I call it crisis, little ch, big ISIS, little t. So that's the one side. Now for Biden, I'll talk about Biden after the ad.
Okay, thank you for reminding me. You're listening to What is Going On. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and I'm speaking with John Hogue, world-renowned authority on Nostradamus and other prophetic traditions, and creator of the HogueProphecy.com website, as well as author of dozens of best-selling books on prophecy. We'll be back with more from John Hogue after the break.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM FM. Being a radio host on IOM FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
Hello, I'm Lisa Berry. Join me every Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for Light on Living. A chance to see new, hear different, and feel more as I shine the spotlight on all the ways to lighten the load of life's challenges. Light on Living is your link to that new way you're looking for, that new understanding that will enhance your life, and that positive connection that will support your growth. So join me and you'll gain insight and start to see things in a new way that motivates you.
I'm Fidel Nshambo. I was born in a city called the Bukavu in the Congo. We were a loving family, and then, boom, everything that I had disappeared in a single day. People think that when you are a refugee and they resettle you to America and all your problems are done. They don't understand that that's the beginning of everything. I was not born a refugee. I was made one.
It's time we welcome refugee families with open arms. Learn more at embracerefugees.org, brought to you by the Ad Council.
Welcome back, John Hogue. I'm riveted. Please continue. Tell us what happens if Biden gets in.
Well, if Biden gets in, I don't see him. I think that this much bandied about 25th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution will be applied to him. And that means that the man is dementia. It's very advanced, and it is shocking to see the denial of this. The Trump derangement syndrome is truly a real amazing thing to me because, and unfortunately, I have to get satirical about it in my writing just to kind of shock my readers out of their stupor about, oh no, he's okay, he's fine. He's not, and he's probably not going to remain in office. I don't think he's going to finish his first year. So when Kamala Harris is going to be the next president after that, there are some things that are dealing with the numerology in Kabbalah, the ancient Jewish tradition, that would make her then, if Biden's the 46th president, she would be the 47th. And it's called it's basically it's not a very good vibratory number to be a leader. It means that she will, long story short, she would basically be way over her head, and the deep state would completely be controlling her. The deep state is real. It's bipartisan. It's an oligarchic class of political leadership. It's one of the reasons why this period in American history between now and the middle of this decade is highly likely to see some kind of revolutionary or civil strife. To hopefully, if some of the prophets that I look at are correct, we might have a new constitutional situation and by 2026. The good news is that a lot of things astrologically shift towards people collectively going through what people in Britain and people in America and people all over the world, the Soviet Union especially when they were invaded by 3 million Germans, that everybody's got to put aside their... When a major disaster is upon one, that is basically defining whether you exist collectively or not. A lot of things that seemed important are put aside, and people work together. This begins to happen at that time of the mid-2020s, and that will be the time when people will become alert to global warming, truly alert to it, truly alert to a lot of the systemic collapses of economic systems that are simply not fair to human beings, and all of this. So, but the thing that concerns me the most is, if Biden is elected, it resumes the most dangerous 4 years, the highest chance of a third world war that's ever happened, because I'm concerned that this hysteria of Russians being responsible for everything that's wrong in the country, which is racist almost. It sounds like the way Germans in 1930s Germany used to say, well, it's the Jews. The Jews are doing everything. And it led to a Holocaust of the Jews. My great concern is that this will lead to a Holocaust of the Russians in a thermonuclear war. And the problem is the people that are behind Harris and behind Biden are very, very interested in pushing Russia to the wall under his administration. And even some of them openly talked about using nuclear weapons. So that's not being talked about in the press, but it's highly dangerous because, and it's an odd thing, we could definitely have a Cuban Missile Crisis event again in the next 4 years, but it'll be a karmic echo to the last. That means it's in a reverse negative. It's like a reverse image of Alice in the Looking Glass. Rather than, it will be the president of the United States playing the shoe beating the table Khrushchev, and the cool Kennedy will be Vladimir Putin. Now, this is another thing that's not understood, but prophecy, especially the greatest prophet of America, Edgar Cayce, saw it very clearly, that in this period of time, rather than Russia being the threat of the world, Russia, he said, would be the hope of the world, the Russia that would rise out of the end of Bolshevism. Well, this is that Russia. And it also is paralleled by Nostradamus' great Eagle King prophecies, when the two eagle kings of the north, well, bald eagle is on the presidential seal of the United States, the two-headed eagle is on the presidential seal of the Russian president. These are the eagle kings. And he's probably talking about either Trump or Putin or Biden or Putin. But we're coming to a thing where they're supposed to be brothers, but they're being divided, halved. Dami, he uses for demis. He spells it in Greek rather than dami, and it means halved in Greek, as well as friend. And what then happens is they are undermined by their vassals in the Middle East, by the Babari satrapy. This is Nostradamus' statement. That is an anagram in French for d'Arab, of Arabs or from Arabs. So an Arab satrapy. So there are any number of rebellious vassals that would cause an escalation. The guns of August with nuclear weapons, dragging in the Chinese and the Russians and the Americans and the Israelis into a war over the Gulf. So it's scary stuff, I know, but you've got to know when and how the house could be set on fire so that you can prevent it from happening.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like America's, between a rock and a hard place, two roads.
Or Iraq and a hard place.
Yeah, exactly. But, it's going to have a similar outcome, one way or the other. Rome has to fall. The thing that interested me and gave me some hope is you talk about protests and riots and a fuse being lit under other forces, protesting, rioting. human voices long silenced will roar. And we are seeing this. I mean, I'm seeing it in England with people standing up and saying, hang on, what you're doing doesn't make sense. I'm going to protest about this. People are seeing through some of the, the veils that have been put in front of their eyes for a long time. And that
was like the Extinction Rebellion movement that was born in England.
Yes.
Is one of those. It is a what Roger Hollam is doing is a significant rebellion of nonviolence.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think there will be much more of it. I think, no matter what happens, there will always be people who will, and hopefully more and more people who will stand up and say, no, we're not having this.
It only happens when things get bad enough.
Yeah.
That's why the bad sometimes has its good side.
Yes, yeah. So, we've got about 7 or 8 minutes left, John. I want to know, what have you learned about humanity through your 30-year study of predictions? And, what can you deduce is going to happen moving forward? Are we going to, come to the best of ourselves and move through this and beyond?
It may very well be that every civilization in the universe comes to a point where, unconscious of its divinity, it becomes powerful like gods and alters its world. So what we're doing to our world is probably, in variations on the theme, what every potentially sentient animal species on another planet that creates civilization has to face. And it's also quite likely that a lot of them do not make it. But because nature has this way of making infinite possibilities, like a tree that can fill grain silos with its seeds from its entire lifetime, but maybe only that tree becomes to its full potential. So it's very likely that very few of the societies survive this gauntlet. But for those who do, they become gardeners of themselves. And the way to do that is through never allowing the children to be replicated into identified egocentric people that, for all well-meaning intentions, priests, pedagogues, and parents, have also been seeded to be stuck in the syndrome of repeating the past and calling it the future, and never actually living in the only timeless time we live in, which is the eternity of the present. This is where all the secrets of the universe are waiting for us. A simple being here and now, in whatever way you're doing things, waking, sleeping, action, no action. If you can be here now, that's the place where all the genius that you came into the world is waiting for you. All the innocence, luminous innocence that you came into the world with is waiting for you. And it is a place where all that identity that has tried to coat you into being a persona, a personality, a mask that society has made you, cannot exist there. Because mind exists when we create time. Because a mind is a goal-oriented phenomenon, passing phenomenon. It has to have identity, time, to keep it alive. But this is the witnessing consciousness inside of us that is not time or mind or ego, that simply watches like a perfect mirror reflecting what is up before it perfectly until the images finally, one by one, depart, and then it only can reflect its own vast and endless emptiness. And that is a hint that Osho said, that I heard him say, of when that happens, then one has come home. The ocean is remembered inside the shape that's called a wave. The dewdrop becomes the ocean becomes the dewdrop. And so meditation, in my estimation, as a human being, and being no better or worse than any other human being, we're all equally unique, is that this is what has to happen. Enough people have to make a change that will increase the average number of enlightened beings on the planet by, Krishnamurti said 5 to 10 people, Gurdjieff said 100, Osho said 200. This is the greatest experiment before us, people who are on a spiritual path, because it's never been done on this planet before. And that is the experience of trying to find if we can see if consciousness is a quality that outbalances the quantity of unconsciousness. It's like if there's a flower, a lotus needs a big muddy river to grow. A beautiful rose needs a lot of manure to grow. So the quality of the rose balances out the quantity of the manure.
Well said.
And then you get a garden.
Then you get a garden. John, I just want to turn our attention, because we're almost out of time. I want you to quickly tell us about the Hogue Prophecy Bulletin and the new book.
Yes, so the Hogue Prophecy, HOGUEPROPHECY, is the website. You go there. You can also see me, my younger self, looking back at you, and just under that, you can get private readings from me online using Zoom. There's free samples on the website, but I also ask you for a donation of $60 for an entire 12 months of full access, like Sandie has, of these articles, fully illustrated, sent to you as PDF files. The book, The Roaring 2020s, Decade of Destruction and Transformation, is actually still being written. And what I'm doing is creating a special expanded edition that for $12.50 or a little more US dollars gets you on a list to receive that when it is finally completed sometime in the spring of next year.
Okay, and people can find that on your website.
Yes, and you have that link too that I sent you.
Yes, and I will just mention it to everybody before we close. John Hogue, thank you for joining us today. It's been most illuminating. Not nearly enough time to go through it all, but I hope you'll come back again.
I hope to come back too.
Thank you, John. So, for more information about John Hogue, the Prophecy Bulletin, his books, The Roaring Twenties, Decade of Destruction and Transformation, you can visit HogueProphecy.com. And the link, I'm going to read this out. You may have to replay it a few times to get it all, because it's not short. Hogue-Prophecy.com/predictions-the-donors-only-edition. Predictions 2016, the expanded donors-only edition, with dashes in between each of those words. So do check it out. The Hogue Prophecy Bulletin is well worth subscribing to. And that's it for this week. That's all we have time for. So I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. You can learn more about me and the No BS Spiritual Book Club at sedgbeer.com. And in the meantime, I will be back with another edition of What is Going On at the same time next week. Till then, it's goodbye from me.